So my practice of prayer at that point, in my understanding of my relationship with God, which was very elementary at best, was that, well, maybe God can help me out. Maybe God will help me out. So I began to pray in the midst of crying, and I began to beseech God, if you really love me, God, if you're really, what I've come to know, I hear all these great things about you, if you'll really bring this, help me out here and bring my buddy home, if you'll bring my dog back to me, if you'll help my dog find her way back to me, whatever the case may be, if you'll just help me out, then I'll be beholden to you, and I will try to be a better person. I'll try to do whatever you would require of me. I just miss my friend so much. And I cried and I held that prayer for some time. Well, what do you think happened? What can you imagine happened? Well, basically, I never saw that dog again.
Hi, my name is Colleen. I live here in Nashville, Tennessee, and I just want to share with you why I find True Thought spiritual community, True Thought ministry is something that is part of my life. It's beautiful. It brings a sense of peace and joy to my everyday being. I give you a little bit of myself. I started spiritual journey, spiritual seeking, spiritual pathway a little over 20 years ago. And I was going through some tough times in my life. And I really wanted to find something better that was simple to make me happy. I have taken many classes, many teachers of all kinds, Buddhism, Taoist, to Eckhart Tolle, to Deepak Chopra, to Tony Robbins, even to the law of attraction. It has just been a life changer, and how grateful I am to Brother T and Reverend Renee for their teaching of many things that I have learned in the past from many different teachings. They brought it together in one. There's so much richness in their information and so much richness in their teaching, and the love that they put behind it is amazing. And every Sunday, to hear their Sunday message, I just feel, again, with my community, even though it's over the internet, it's not in person, but I'm still in person. To where on Wednesdays we have our Inside the Message, and then we have our talk afterwards, and we commune with people from around in different states. How exciting it was and is to this day that I get to be part of such a community. So much love and kindness and compassion that these two bring to not just me, but to many, many, many people and hearts in our community and around the United States. If this resonates with you to grow your spirituality deeper on another level of consciousness, Christ consciousness, I really would love to see you participate in our Sundays, Sunday message, and then on Wednesdays, and we to see each other. So it's a lot of fun. Well, I really hope to see you all there. It's something that you won't be disappointed. At least I wasn't, and my husband isn't. So thank you. Thank you. Namaste.
Good morning, and thanks for joining us again today here at True Thought Spiritual Community here on our YouTube channel. We're excited for you to be here with us and appreciate your being here. My name is Brother T, and I'll be sharing a message with you today. And before we begin, I'm going to ask that we come together for a moment of silence together, just to take a good deep breath momentarily. And as we turn within, I'm going to ask Spirit to join us here in this place, in this space, in this time this morning. We ask that our family join us, our brothers and sisters in spirit, our guides, angels, and loved ones, and to buoy us up in a higher frequency of consciousness so that we can commune and we can be informed by Spirit today in this message. And so we are so grateful for that love and for that connection. And so it is. Again, thank you for joining us. I appreciate you being here. And today I just want to share a few thoughts. I know the last couple of weeks we've been talking about the levels of consciousness, and we're just kind of starting to get into it, and we don't want to get too deep into it. So today, I just want to talk about basically the first level of consciousness that was recorded. Last week, Rev Renee kind of introduced us to the overall overview of the primarily 4 levels of consciousness. And we've been talking about how important consciousness is for us in our experience of this life, and how we can navigate consciousness to improve our experience of life. And these things are absolutely true. So today, I just want to talk primarily about the first level of consciousness that she elucidated, which was called victim consciousness. So let's begin by sharing a story. When I was a young boy, literally, I think I was in around the 2nd grade, we had moved to a place that was kind of out in the country a little bit, a little closer into town. And so we kind of moved into almost like a subdivision of a very small rural community as I was growing up. But in this rural community, we took everything with us, and one of those things was my dog. And my mom was always afraid of dogs. She'd had an experience as a child, and so we couldn't have dogs in the house, and dogs were okay, but they had to be outside. But I had this pet dog. I can't remember where it came from, but I do remember I was very connected to it, and it was very loving, and I had a relationship with this dog. And we moved to this new location, and lo and behold, after just a couple of weeks, one of my favorite buddies disappeared. And I waited around, and I thought, well, surely he's going to show up, I'd put the food out, put the water out, but didn't see him after several days. And it really kind of broke my heart. I felt like I'd lost a good friend. And so I remember sitting out, I kind of had a little lawn chair. It was sitting out in the front yard. And I remember sitting out there one day, I think it was like the weekend, and I'd realized that, hadn't seen the dog all week, and it was a Saturday morning. And the family's doing whatever the family's doing on the inside, but I went out and I sat out in that chair. And I remember thinking to myself, well, maybe God will help me with this. And so I began to basically pray in the best way I might know how at that point. So you can imagine I was only 7 or 8 years old. And so I remember sitting there in my lawn chair with my feet, my knees, holding onto my knees and just sitting there and really became quite tearful and was really, in grieving because I'd lost a good friend. So my practice of prayer at that point, in my understanding of my relationship with God, which was very elementary at best, was that, well, maybe God can help me out. Maybe God will help me out. So I began to pray in the midst of crying, and I began to beseech God, if you really love me, God, if you're really, what I've come to know, I hear all these great things about you, if you'll really bring this, help me out here and bring my buddy home, if you'll bring my dog back to me, if you'll help my dog find her way back to me, whatever the case may be, if you'll just help me out, then I'll be beholden to you, and I will try to be a better person. I'll try to do whatever you would require of me. I just miss my friend so much. And I cried, and I held that prayer for some time. Well, what do you think happened? What can you imagine happened? Well, basically, I never saw that dog again. Not unless that dog reincarnated and became another one of my favorite friends later in life. I've had several dogs. I love dogs. I love cats too. And they've become and have been good friends in my life. But the point is that at the level of consciousness that I was operating at, I was beseeching God to help me. in my experience of form and to help me in my experience of the world. And so that this all-powerful entity called God, which was separate from me at that point in my life, could help me and would help me. And if I was worthy of love, if I was worthy of that support, and if my animal, surely my animal was worthy, because, I was a good dog and had never done anything wrong, and, was a great companion. Certainly, God would see his way to helping us out, right? And that would be a victim level consciousness, because I believed that I was victimized, that I had lost something that I love. That's impossible. That something could be taken away from me. That's impossible. That God was pulling the strings and manipulating all of us here, me especially, and my dog. I was subject to manipulation, which would kind of make me a victim, right? I mean, if you can be manipulated, if you can be controlled, if you can be harmed or hurt by some power outside of yourself, well, then certainly you would be a victim. And as it turns out, that is we talk about the primary level of consciousness, the beginning level of consciousness, because as a child, 7 or 8 year old child, I was fairly narcissistic, I would imagine, at that age. I mean, it was all about me, and of course I had this companion and I wanted what I wanted, because that was a special relationship. And also, maybe I was special enough that God would help me out, right? So I'm sharing the story because I think it's important to recognize that as we evolve through the levels of consciousness, our connection, our relationship with God, and another way of saying that is our relationship with love, changes quite dramatically, because we move from the idea of separation at the lower level of consciousness. Victim consciousness is a consciousness of separation, right? And we do things to reinforce that perception, actually. And we'll talk about that briefly today. We don't have a lot of time this morning. I know you have a busy day and you're going to be doing your life today. But I do want to talk about it at least on a little bit more detail than we've covered so far, because if you discover a little bit more about the levels of consciousness, and we've shared this with you before, the work that Dr. David Hawkins did in a book called Power versus Force, through kinesiology, he kind of mapped out the journey of consciousness from the lower levels, which we'll call duality, to the higher levels, which we can call oneness. And along that journey, we begin to discover ourself and our relationship with love, with divine entity that we call God or Source or the universe or whatever name you want to give it. It doesn't really matter. The point is that we develop a more intimate relationship and a connection, and we begin to join in union and relationship with that energy, with that vibration, with that consciousness, with that self, knowing self, which is actually who and what we are actually anyway, right? We are an extension of that love of God, that mind of love, of all-knowing. But that's the upper levels of consciousness. Let's go back to the victim level consciousness, which, as it turns out, according to Dr. Hawkins' work, I'll say over 70%. I believe when he was doing his work, the consciousness of the world revealed itself through his work, that about almost 80%, I believe it was 78% of the world, is operating at the victim level of consciousness. And that's kind of important to know, because if we're looking at a world of 7 billion people and growing, and 70% or 75% of are operating at a level of fear and all of the attributes, because each level of consciousness has certain attributes that we can point to and we can recognize. And that helps us to know where we are as we're navigating consciousness. That if we're operating at those lower levels of consciousness, and as we've already talked about here on many of our inspirational messages, and certainly in our Inside the Messages on Wednesdays, the world is reflective of our consciousness. And so let's talk briefly about some of those attributes. And the very lowest level of that level of consciousness that we call victim consciousness is called shame. And if we look at, tribal communities historically that might oust somebody for quote unquote bad behavior from the community, you could recognize, and you would recognize, that that is a very destructive, almost a death sentence, because we have to exist because God created us in relationship. We really cannot survive outside of relationship. Back in the war and what was being done, by Hitler, and children were taken away from their parents, and they were going to create this, this perfect a group of children who would be, part of the world at that point as they saw it. When those children as babies were taken away from their parents, even though they were given food and they were given nutrition and they were given water and they were taken care of, but they didn't experience love. And many of them couldn't survive that. We cannot survive without love. So imagine shame as that very lower level, one of the most low levels that we really can calibrate, that Dr. Hawkins actually did calibrate through his work. And then we move up to other attributes. And of course, some that you're familiar with that we talk about and we recognize would be guilt. Goes right in there with shame, right in the lower levels. But then as we move up, we begin to recognize that fear is primary core of this level of consciousness. It appears from this level of consciousness, the reason we would beseech God for assistance is because we are a victim of the world, and the world is causative. The world is happening to us, right? As we evolve, we're going to begin to discover, as you probably already have, I'm sure, if you're listening to me today, that we are causative. The world is the effect. This experience we call the world is the effect or the reflection of our consciousness. So if we're operating at fear, then we are operating at a beseeching level. We're feeling ourselves as victims. And so we're going to do the things that make sense to us from an egoic, small-minded, basically childish perspective, that we've got to do whatever, that we can only survive if we are doing the things necessary for our survival. In other words, God's not taking care of us. Love's not taking care of us. We have to take care of us. It's kind of me against the world, so to speak. And at these levels of consciousness, at these lower levels of consciousness, the most heinous of things that we look at and we could judge those things and say, oh, that's horrible. That somebody might murder somebody, or somebody might steal from somebody, or somebody might rape someone, or somebody might harm children. I mean, the list goes on and on of the atrocities that we point to and can say, that's horrible. But the people that are doing these things are operating from a perspective that that's what they need to do because they're trying to survive. In their mind, they've justified, if you will, through their quote unquote judgment, their actions. And when we look at their actions, we quote unquote justify our actions. And we could say, okay, that's unjust. And so you need to be punished, right? And that's going to create a correction or whatever. But none of that is operating out of a higher consciousness or operating out of love. A couple of more attributes of this victim consciousness would be basically the idea that since we can be attacked, that we need to defend ourselves. And one of the best methods that we use to defend ourselves is anger. Anger is a defense, right? And it's really was an amazing part of my journey to get that one little point of truth, that every time I was acting out of anger, I was acting out of defense because I was afraid of something. You see, again, fear and guilt are the cornerstones of this level of consciousness. And so I want to share with you that we can evolve through these levels of consciousness by, number one, recognizing these attributes. And when we're acting out from those vibrations of consciousness, if you will, of fear or guilt. Another one is, basically is called pride. If we look at our military, our military is there to act out control. And control is a very low level of consciousness because we feel victimized. We need to control, the world so that we're not put in harm's way, et cetera, et cetera. So if 78% of the world or 80% of the world or 70% of the world or whatever that number is operating at this level of consciousness, and there are billions of people, and the world is reflective, are we really surprised at what we see going on in the world? People are trying to protect themselves. People are acting out of fear, and they're acting out of anger. And there's one more element that's pervasive in this level of consciousness, and that is the action of judgment. Because we're acting out of judgment because we believe we can be victimized, and we may beseech God, or we might try to build walls around ourselves. We might try to gather people around us, but we make commitment to specialness because specialness and loyalty to specialness and judgment of other people helps us to decide who we want to hang out with because they're like us, and people we don't want to hang out with because we've judged them as unworthy of our love. In other words, separation is what we experience in all of our interactions with the world. We look at ourselves as separate from the world. Now, when I say we looking at ourselves this way, I'm really talking about this part of our mind called the ego self. And that's not really exactly who we are, or certainly not everything that we are. And as we travel these levels of consciousness, we begin to understand that we are way, way more than we've allowed ourselves to be. We are limitless in consciousness, and we are infinite in that limitlessness to see and know and experience much that's well beyond what we can appear to experience in physical form. So last week, Reverend A talked about Jesus and falling asleep in the boat and some of the disciples waking him up because of the storm. And he basically just said, "Peace, be still." And the winds calmed down and the ocean calmed down. And the disciples couldn't grasp that. They couldn't imagine that. See, he was a master. He had evolved consciously along this journey that we've been talking about and will continue to talk about, and realize that the world is a reflection of us, right? Even our weather. And I know that sounds really bizarre, but the weather is reflecting our consciousness. And so when we see lots of storms and we see lots of calamity, and we in our world see lots of things that seem to be chaotic and out of control, it's reflecting our inner consciousness. And so if 80% of us or 70% of us, whatever that number is, are operating at this level of consciousness, what we're going to experience is that being reflected back to us. So what can we do? Well, we can do what we're doing right now. We can learn more about ourselves, and we can evolve consciously. And as we evolve consciously, we offset that energy with higher vibration. And so we'll be talking about that, I'm sure, next week, and then the week after that, and the week after that. And this is a journey of discovery of self. And our brother Jesus made that journey himself, actually. And if you would like to understand a little bit more about his journey, he actually shared his journey in this book called Jesus, My Autobiography, that was channeled by Jesus. It was basically communicated, and it was scribed by Tina Louise Spalding. And I'll put a link down here if you want to. You can get that on Amazon or whatever. And it's just, I think it really helps us to bring what the world is called, or our religions have put Jesus on a pedestal, that he's special, that he's different, that he's separate from us. His story, in his own words, if you will, about his journey through physical form and his experience of enlightenment really helps him to be, for me at least, much more approachable as a brother, as a friend, and as a guide. So I'll put a link down there for you for that. But if you'd like to take the time to read about, you'll discover that he went through a journey, I think it was about 3-year journey to learn more about himself through the observation of other people. And he began to realize that everybody kind of had we all, as culturally in different cultures around the world, we kind of make up our own rules and our own ways of behaving. And then we require each other to kind of be loyal, to be faithful to those ideas of who we are and how we should be reacting with each other. But the most important reaction and interaction and relationship we can have is a relationship with love. And by that relationship, we can begin to know ourselves in a new way. So those are conversations we're going to continue to have. I'll leave it at that for today, but I just want to say thank you again for kind of hanging out with me and journeying with me through this discussion. And we'll be providing tools for you and some classes, hopefully in the new year, where we can kind of get into this together and become in conversational atmospheres or conversational environments where we can learn from you and you can ask questions and we can help other people. And you will indeed help other people and yourself as you continue to travel this journey of self-awakening. So thank you so much for being here today. You are definitely loved, and your energy of being involved in community and being involved in your own growth is changing the world. And I'm sure you're noticing as you journey that the world is reflecting back more experiences of joy, more experiences of relationship, more experiences of blessings and love as you evolve consciously. So thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for being here. So I'm going to close with another quick moment of silence and prayer. Just join together, if you will. Let's take another good deep breath. I just want to say thank you, Spirit. Thank you, love. Thank you, Father, for being with us in this journey today of introspection, for being with us and helping to inform our conversation and helping us to be together today. We are joined in union and relationship with each other as we come to you today, as we come to Spirit, as we come to the recognition that love is the only relationship that's worthy of our attention. And giving it our full appreciation is to be closer to you, Father, to be closer to love and to each other as well. And let the healing begin in this world as we all grow and evolve consciously to the beginning of the understanding that we are one with love. And so it is. God bless you. Have a great week. Hope you'll join us on Wednesday inside the message and our Zoom session afterwards. We have some great conversations. You can find us at truethought.org. God bless you for being here. Have a blessed week.